Hey guys, welcome back to another community ranking. This time you guys decided which was the hardest boss in the Dark Souls Trilogy. I picked 16 bosses from all the 3 games that I thought, are the hardest ones. And unlike the previous tournaments that I did, I was actually super excited about this one because there was a very clear favorite in all the other tournaments that I did. But in this one, I think there were 3 favorites: Nameless King, Sister Fried, and Mither. So I was very curious to see who was gonna win. So let's look into the results, shall we? In our first round of 16, we had Manus from Dark Souls 1, Pontiff from Dark Souls 3, Twin Princess from Dark Souls 3, and Dark Lurker from Dark Souls 2. And in the comments, Bowser Well Nada said Manus, and it's not even close. And Bassem Abul Noor with a completely different opinion, Manus, really? And I'm not gonna lie, I was very surprised with the results of this round, because I never in my life would imagine that Manus would win this with 49% of the votes. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Manus is the hardest boss in Dark Souls 1, but, bosses in Dark Souls 3 are much more complicated, have a much bigger moveset, so I was really not expecting this. Pontiff got second place with 27% of the votes, beating Twin Princess with only 15, and Dark Lurker got last place with only 9% of the votes. In our second round, we had one of the favorites to win the whole thing, Sister Fried from Dark Souls 3, we had ONS from Dark Souls 1, we had Demon Prince from Dark Souls 3, and Artorias also from Dark Souls 1. And in the comments, Sushar said, I've defeated Fried 160 times and she's much harder than all the other bosses. Now, I know Sushar very well, I know this is his favorite boss, so he was probably very happy to see that Fried completely wiped the floor with all the bosses around here with 82% of the votes, which is crazy. But what's even crazier is the fact that Demon Prince did not get second place. That went for ONS with 7% and Demon Prince got only 6%. And Artorias with 5. Like, I cannot believe that Demon Prince was out of this group and left the tournament so soon. Big surprise here. Now for our third group, we had Nameless King, another one of the favorites. We had Gale, which is a very hard boss as well. I was curious to see what was going to happen here. We had Calamite from Dark Souls 1 and Suralon from Dark Souls 2. And in the comments, UFC fan said Gale is harder than Nameless King, and Kirani Kib said completely the opposite, Nameless is the hardest. And this was quite a debate in the comments, like a lot of people were rooting for Gale, a lot of people were rooting for Nameless, but in the end, Nameless King got the win with 59% of the votes, and Gale wasn't much far away with 31% of the votes. Calamite and Suralon though were destroyed with only 7% of the votes, and Suralon with only 3. Now for our final round of 16, we had again another favorite, Mither, Soul of Cinder, Fume Knight, and Blue Smelter Demon. And in the comments, I was blown away because absolutely everyone went against Mither. Grey Strat said Mither being harder than Soul of Cinder is wild, absolutely asinine. Yellow Z said Cinder has the hardest moveset. Sargatas, I consider Cinder stronger moveset wise. And BBQ Cheese said imagine sinking Mither is harder than Cinder. So even though there was a crazy amount of people rooting for Soul of Cinder, I guess most people remember their first playthrough and how hard Mither was back then, because Mither completely wiped the floor with all the bosses in this round with 72% of the votes. Soul of Cinder just barely got that second place with 13%. Fume Knight was almost the only Dark Souls 2 boss going to the round of 8, but it didn't quite make it with 11% of the votes, and Blue Smelter Demon only got 4%. And for our final 8, we had again, as usual, 1 versus 1. So we had Manus versus Ornstein and Smaug, both from Dark Souls 1. And in the comments, the Blue Hood said ONS feels like a joke compared to Daddy Manus, and I am mildly upset with most of you two said Manus is ridiculous fast for Dark Souls 1 combat. And I have to agree with these two. I think Manus is the hardest boss in Dark Souls 1, it's not even close. And in fact, Manus won very easily with 79% of the votes against 21 from Ornstein and Smaug, so Manus advances to the final 4. In our second round, we had Sister Fried versus Pontiff, And Scamvid said in the comments that Sister Fried is the only boss I use a summon for it, and that proves very well that she is indeed very hard. And Lord of Gaming said, why do people call him Pontiff? Sullivan is his name. And yeah, I do apologize, I am not English, I did not know that Pontiff meant Pope, but now I do, so from now on I'm gonna try to call him Sullivan instead of Pontiff. So thanks for the tip, Lord of Gaming. As for the results, Sister Fried won easily with 93% of the votes. This wasn't even close. A complete annihilation from Sister Fried as she advances to the final four. In our third round, we had Nameless King versus Soul of Cinder, and in the comments, Upside Productions said this tournament is gonna come down between Mither and Fried. My money is on Mither, and we will see later if you were right or wrong. But as for this match, this was a complete annihilation. Nameless King won with 84% of the votes against 16 from Soul of Cinder. And this made some people upset because Soul of Cinder is indeed quite hard. He has a gigantic moveset, 4 phases plus, you know, the second phase with him being Gwyn. But yeah, Nameless King does hits like a truck and his fame is very well deserved. So he advances to the final four. And in our fourth round, we had Mither versus Gale. This was a big match. I was very excited to see who was gonna win this. And in the comments, You Don't Know Me said Gale should be easily winning this. Tarnished Warrior said Mither is the easiest DLC boss, and Ivana said, guess you guys aren't going for his head or using Pestilent Mist. So again, a lot of people were going against Mither in the comments. Everyone thinks Mither is very easy. But the reality is that if you go for the votes, Mither actually won with 68% of the vote. But I'm gonna take a guess that a lot of people were angry with this result. Now it's time for our final four, and we had Sister Fried against Manus. And in the comments, James Lau said Fried is twice as difficult as Manus. And I don't think there is much to explain around here. Dark Souls 3 bosses are way harder than most of Dark Souls 1 bosses. And Sister Fried being one of the hardest bosses in Dark Souls 3, I don't think Manus ever had a chance. Because Sister Fried completely annihilated Manus with 86% of the votes, and she is our first finalist. As for the other round, we had Mither, the hated boss, against Nameless King, and in the comments, again, people went against Mither. We had Dragon Slayers saying Mither is hard until you realize that you're not supposed to be running under him. We had Manuela Mana saying Nameless is the hardest Souls boss for me, 88 deaths versus 25 against Mither. We had Boo Boo Doo Doo Gaming, that's a funny name, saying neither of them deserve to be in the final. He was rooting for Demon Prince, and like I said, Demon Prince was easily the biggest surprise in this tournament, being eliminated so early. But again, all the comments going against Mither did not work because Mither also won this round and is in the final against Sister Fried. Now, as usual, I always do a third place round, and we had Nameless King against Manus. And in the comments, Knight Gale said Nameless was the one who inspired all the bosses in Elden Ring with delayed attacks. And I actually can see that. I don't know if that was what really happened or not, but Nameless King does have tons of delayed attacks, and that messes a lot with people's timings, and that's a big thing in Elden Ring bosses. So who knows, maybe he's correct. As for the results though, Nameless King won easily with 75% of the votes, and it got third place in the tournament. As for the final, we had Sister Fried versus Mither, which was kind of an expected final. And this time I was actually quite surprised because all that hate that Mither got around the tournament, in this final there was a lot of people rooting for him, and there were a lot of people rooting for Sister Fried. I actually really enjoyed to read all the comments, and I was also happy to see that in the end Sister Fried won the entire tournament with 68% of the votes against 32 from Mither. And I was happy for myself because I also think Sister Fried is the hardest boss in the Dark Souls Trilogy. And I'm also pretty sure that Sushar was also very happy with this outcome because Sister Fried is his favorite boss of all time. And he wrote in the comments, I don't know what is easier, Mither or voting for Freed in this poll. So there you go, guys. These are all the results from the Dark Souls Trilogy tournament. As you're seeing this video right now, I'm doing in the community tab a hardest boss of all time tournament, but I will not do a video about that tournament because many of the bosses I have never fought and I don't have footage from them. So probably my next video will be a remnant to review, but I promise I will get back with more tournament videos. Hope you enjoyed watching and I see you guys next time. Bye bye.